Okay, good evening, everyone. Obviously, I got a call from Andrea um, saying that she was having the same problem I was having, that when you click on the Zoom link in the classroom, that it's asking for a password. And I tried different passwords and none of them worked. I tried the class number. So I'm going to try and follow up on that. I've had a couple of issues with Zoom the last couple of classes, so I do apologize for that. I did want everyone to be on here for a lot of reasons, but this is being recorded. Obviously, you'll see this is a recording that you're watching if you're watching this, which I will I'll put on YouTube, and I'll put an announcement in the course room announcements so that you can get your points and get the benefit of a little bit of live lecture, if you will. I am going to contact Central Christian College tomorrow, phone and email them and see what I'm doing wrong, perhaps, or what I missed, or if that's the case, or if there's something they need to fix. So anyway, welcome to Social Psychology. I am your humble professor, Will Nicholas, Dr. Will Nicholas. I am so happy to be on this journey with you. I mean, there's so many things I wanted to cover tonight. One of them is the fact of how grateful I am to be able to teach this course and have all of you in here in the course. Social psychology is one of my favorite topics. I mean, really, really up there, sort of in that top 1% with just a couple others. Psychology is my absolute favorite topic, but psychology is such a, and we're going to talk about this gets into sort of the lecture. Psychology is such a broad discipline. Psychology covers everything from, of course, social psychology to counseling psychology to clinical psychology to industrial and organizational psychology, family psychology, sports psychology, school psychology, educational psychology. There's about 49 different divisions in the APA, which is the American Psychological Association group, if you will. The APA, or American Psychological Association, has several, has hundreds and thousands of members. So it's an organization that you can actually join as a student for quite a discount, and I would highly recommend that if you're interested in psychology, and I hope you are. One of the sort of quasi homework assignments I'm going to give you, it's not really a homework assignment. You've got plenty to do in the course room. But if you love psychology and are interested in psychology and maybe want to pursue this as a career, then I encourage you, for your own benefit, on your free time, to go in and go on the internet and in the search bar, it's apa.org. That's the web address for American Psychological Association, and it has a lot of resources there for you. A lot of them don't cost anything. And again, if you would like to join, I highly recommend it. And it's not, well, depends on your situation and whether it's expensive or not expensive. If you're a billionaire, it's not expensive at all. If you're a millionaire, it's still not expensive. But I know taking classes and everything, and everyone has families, so even $30, $40 might not seem like much, but it might be. But anyway, take a look at it, see what it is. I don't know exactly what it is. But for students, I know you do get it. That's what I don't know. You get a discount. So certainly something to look at if you are interested. So, and you'll see the division there for social and personality psychology, which is interesting how they combine personality, the psychology of personality, and social psychology together. It makes sense if you get to know psychology a little bit better. Having said that, once again, welcome. My name is Dr. Nicholas, Dr. Will Nicholas, and I am honored and privileged to be your professor, as I said before, on this journey. Hopefully you've got your book, by the way. The book, it's quite a textbook. It's pretty big, but I do like the textbook. It's not written on a high level. It's not too verbose, and the information that is in there is absolutely valuable. one of the things that I absolutely love about social psychology is some of the things that you learn in here, you can start to apply or recognize that they are impacting your life right now. You can take it to work tomorrow. You can use it with your family tomorrow. And I'll talk about some of those things a little bit tonight and each week as we go on. So to begin, let me point out sort of the definition of social psychology. There's as many definitions, really, I guess, for social psychology as there are social psychologists. Some of them overlap, some of them make sense, but one way to look at it, especially for students starting out at the undergraduate level, who some may be very passionate about psychology, some may be just taking this class because you have to, I get it. But one of the ways to kind of get your mind thinking about what is social psychology. It is how our behavior and our thoughts and our feelings, but we really, with social psychology, we look at behavior probably a little bit more so than some of the other disciplines of psychology, which consider, you can't dismiss emotions because that impacts our behavior as well. But we're typically looking at behavior 60% roughly, and 40% might be thoughts and feelings divided up. That's kind of my shooting from the hip analysis. As we go forward, you might get people to argue with that, but for your mind as students, we're really looking kind of at behavior. So how a group influences our behavior as an individual, as well as how our behavior influences the group, if you think about it that way. I borrowed this definition because I liked it a lot. I came across it rather recently when I was looking at industrial and organizational psychology, which is in many ways, very similar to social psychology, but really taking social psychology and applying it to the work setting or an organizational setting per se that's trying to produce or goods or services. So with social psychology, it's a little bit more broad. We can apply it in many different situations, but we look at how our behavior is affected by people in the group, as well as you hopefully have seen a little bit by now. It's in the middle of the week almost already. The course has been open for a couple of days, so maybe everyone hasn't seen much, but hopefully many of you have seen the videos and have taken a look at the Milgram experiment, as well as I think it's ABC, a clip from ABC, one of the networks, social experiments on how people react. One is at the beach. If you haven't seen it, I won't go into too much of it. I'll touch on it a little bit. Another is how people react when they suspect that a baby has been locked in a hot car, and their behaviors for that. Social psychologists study those kind of things and see how we can help. For example, there is a social psychology term, or social psychological term, if you will, called the bystander effect. And it's, broadly speaking, it's a psychological term, but social psychology especially. And when probably in a general psych book or along the line, you're going to hear about and read about, the Kitty Genovese case. That is a very famous incident that happened in New York City many, many years ago, I think in the 60s, where unfortunately, sadly, Kitty Genovese was brutally beaten and robbed, while many people were looking on, watching this. It happened in a busy, well, no, I shouldn't say, it wasn't a busy street. There weren't many people on the street at this time. It was late at night in kind of a residential area. But the people who witnessed this, some of them were woken up or alerted by the sounds and screams. They all looked out of, it was a New York, so there are people living in apartments or condominiums or high rises, and they're looking out their window, and they see this, they see what's happening, and she's being mugged for a long period of time. And, the question, no one called the police. So social psychologist says, well, what happened? Why did no one call the police? We don't understand. Like, people typically are good people. Most people are, by the earth's, or, by the world's definition of good. And, why did no one think to call the police or to take some sort of action? They wouldn't have had to necessarily go down if they were afraid, but these people had phones. This is, the 1960s and everything. No one even called out. So the idea being, the psyche of everyone says, well, no one's doing it. So you look around and you look to people that are around you that are like you and look at their actions, and we typically will behave in a very similar way. So it sort of reinforces itself, if you will. And that came to be known as the bystander effect. Another way to look at that, people determined, was, well, someone else is going to make the call. So there recently, by the way, have been some people who came back and re-looked at that, who have different ideas about that and some other data that wasn't in some of the original studies. And I don't want to get into that too much, because I think the case really kind of stands on its own merits, if you will, in terms of learning what that is. And we're going to get into some other things as well. But so the bystander effect, here we are. So now we can explain it. What do we do with it? How does this help us? Because social psychologists, like psychologists, they want to help. So one of the things that has come out from that, and maybe you have heard some things like this, especially if you've been certified in CPR and first aid. I've been certified a couple of different times. I'm not really crazy about doing it, but it's nice to have, God forbid, someone around me, stops breathing and what have you. So what social psychologists have done with how does this all connect? Okay, so that social psychologists, what they've done is realized that if someone falls down and has a medical emergency where someone's going to step in and do CPR, the people who are trained in CPR really need to be cognizant and aware that they will likely, just because of our human nature, not that they're bad people, if no one around this person who has passed out is doing anything, our tendency is to not do anything because of this thing we call the bystander effect. We look for people like us. Okay. So sort of train, okay, jump on it, get on that person. And while you're performing CPR, we still want to get paramedics there, don't we? Want medical attention more than CPR. So rather than say someone call 911, because that doesn't do as much to eliminate the bystander effect as we hope that it would. So you point to, because then everyone's looking for someone else to do it, and it takes longer. Even sometimes there's cases I read about, where something happened with someone who'd fallen down, and no one moved. No one went to call 911 because I thought someone else was going to do it. So the person performing CPR says you, and points to someone very directly. And if you know their name, if it's people you know, call them by name. But even if it's a crowd of strangers, which is the bigger problem, you get their attention, make everyone in the crowd know that they have been given the responsibility to call 911. Now what happens is, when that happens, a lot of people call 911 because of the same psychological concept, which is kind of weird, but it's better to have 8 people call 911, 9 people call 911 than nobody. But if you give that responsibility, so now they have to be responsible. They have been given a task to do, along with another psychological concept that someone's performing CPR. So they sort of have now, in a crowd of people, authority, which is what we looked at in the Milgram experiment, which I'm going to get into in just a second. So hopefully you followed my little illustration there, that through social psychology, we look at how a group or other people's behavior influence our behavior, and how our behavior influences a group or other people. It goes both ways. And so we got that, and now we get this idea that something terrible happened to this Kitty Genovese, and now we can explain it. Now what do we do with it to make that better, to make life better, to make certain or minimize the odds that that's going to happen more often, and making this information available to the public, talking about this, bringing this up in social psychology classes and psychology courses and things such as that. So that's the kind of things that we do. Hopefully you did see the video of the Milgram experiment. If you haven't yet, please go look at that. It's 8 minutes, and it is an absolute must. I'm quite sure that in every social psychology class, and most psychology classes, but certainly in every social psychology class, at the undergraduate level, any social psych 101, they're talking about Milgram and the Stanford prison experiments. But Stanley Milgram wanted to understand why probably very good people in Nazi Germany would carry out these terrible atrocities and take people to the gas chamber and kill people. And he just couldn't understand that people would do that. So what he set up this experiment, which I won't go into because you can see it on the video, and explains obviously much better with visual aids. But he set up an experiment to see how far people would follow authority. And they follow it pretty far. There's no question about it. They follow it pretty far. Other experiments have also validated that, including the Stanford prison experiment, which validated that, as well as many other things, with the prison guards being the ones in authority, and the prisoners following along, reluctantly, but still in awe, following along. So Stanley Milgram, it's a very famous experiment. We could never repeat that. There is institutional review boards that, if at a university and other places as well, when you want to do any kind of experiment, especially and that includes human participants, we don't call them subjects, by the way, we call them participants, to make sure that no harm is going to come to them, either physical harm or psychological harm. Clearly, the Milgram experiments caused psychological distress on the participants. No question about it. And nothing that really put them like in an institution, or I don't mean to minimize that, but clearly that happened. It happened with the Stanford prison experiment as well. So that's we sort of jumped right in there and got to the good stuff. I want to just take a step back here and take a look at some of the things you'll also just kind of go over. One of the things that I want to point out and get on a rock and scream is, understand this. When people come up with their methods and their theories with social psychology or psychology, understand it is many things, including science. There's a term out there, of course, I have as a psychologist and educator, I have my strong feelings about some things, but there is this sort of thought process out there in the academic world, and the scientific world, that psychology and sociology, they're not real science because of various things, or sometimes they call them the soft science. Well, it's not true, because we use the scientific method to come up with our theories and our solutions to some very big concerns and problems, if you will, in the world, to fix those. And I'm not knocking chemistry, for example. In chemistry, we know if we take 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, H2O, that's water, right? One knows H2O is water. That's 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. So that's always going to get you water. And it's very easy if you're in a lab and everything's sterile and the test tubes are sterile and there's no other ingredients there. You're always going to get water. But so those sort of folks, chemists and biologists, say, well, you don't always get the same results, in social psychology. Well, yeah, that's true, because we're dealing with so many other variables. It makes it more challenging. Doesn't make it any less scientific. So understand that, and especially if you love this discipline, you're going to go on. Don't ever feel like a second-class citizen in the scientific community. So, in spite of the fact that there are many variables, we can come up with some solid theories, as Milgram did, as Philip Zimbardo, who was the one who did the Stanford prison experiments, as he did. In spite of the fact that there's those challenges, I would say that to those chemists, if you will, who say, well, yeah, I always get water with 2 parts hydrogen. Yeah, well, not really, because if you really get down in there, even water, you get out of through a filter has other other ingredients in it. So that's not 100% pure either. It has to be so many measures taken to eliminate all the other variables. But anyway, so we use the scientific method, and you're probably going to see that on a test. So that might be something that you want to remember, that we use the scientific method to come up with our ideas and our theories and answers and solve our problems. But I'm going to give you just a rundown here. You don't need to write these down, but you can find these different places. The things that typically we look at in social psychology are group behavior, where clinical psychology might look at an individual's behavior in isolation. We look at the group's behavior, but we look at the individual's behavior within the group as well, and that's really key. Social perception, leadership. We look at nonverbal behavior. We look at personalities as well, because it may not seem like it at first, but social psychology and personality psychology are actually very closely linked. When some people think of social psychology, they think of the big group and they think of a group of people, as opposed to the individual. And then when you think of personality, you think not only of the individual, but like breaking down, that person into parts, if you will. But people's personality impacts and affects how they behave. And when you have 2 personality types interacting on a given project, things are going to happen with those individuals because of their personality types and the way they see the world, which will also impact that project, perhaps, often does. If you take one person out and put a person in there that has a different personality type than the one that was removed, could get a whole other outcome, and oftentimes do. So one of the things social psychologists also look at is personality theory, to see which kinds of personalities can work together more effectively, oftentimes. Also educating people about their personalities, and so that they understand how they see the world might not be how others see the world. In fact, it's not typically. We typically, we have the Myers-Briggs, which breaks personality down into not infinite stuff, but for 16 different types. There are other personality assessments that break people's personality down into 4 types. We have everything there, just at least one of the types, one of the components, if you will, is more prevalent, or I call the true north of someone, whether they like to be more friendly or more reserved, or they like adventure, or they like quiet time. Anyway, I won't go too much more into that, but we look at the nonverbal behavior as well. Amy Cuddy has a great video. It might be in the curriculum here. This is the first time I taught this at CCC. I haven't gotten through everything yet, but I'm going to imagine that. I'll say this. Amy Cuddy is a fantastic social psychologist, current, contemporary. And she's really made a name for herself quite recently looking at body language. or what some people call nonverbal behavior. Does a fantastic job. So if it's not in the curriculum, I will put a couple of her videos up so that you can see them. She's a well-spoken doctor, person, lady, and I think you'll get a lot out of that, because that's something that social psychologists look at. Conformity, of course, we talked about that already with the Milgram experiments, and that's something we look at. Aggression, we social psychologists look at why some people are more aggressive. Is it their personality? Or is it some events that have led to them being aggressive? And again, sort of gathering that data and then saying, okay, now we know this, what can we do about it? Because I think that, well, not in every case, but in most cases, most people would agree that aggression is probably not good, or probably could be managed differently. You wouldn't want to necessarily just let people take advantage of you. But what can we do to prevent that without making you aggressive, if you will? And obviously another, these are all very, contemporary issues in society, like prejudice. What makes people prejudice? What can we do about it? What factors go into that? Is it areas one lives in? Is it their family? And how do we? I understand even what it is, because if you take a survey of people, they mix prejudice and bigotry up, and prejudice and other things. Prejudice is typically, and again, you're going to get a few different definitions for this. Some people say everyone's prejudiced because they all prejudge, and that's true. We prejudge people walking down the street. We make some. If we meet somebody, we notice 7 things about them right away. We start to formulate an opinion about them, neither good or bad. Hopefully, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be bad. We notice their weight, we notice their age, we notice their gender, race, age, gender, weight, race, age, and the first thing really is age. We notice. Well, first is gender, then age. Those are the first 2 things that we look at. Weight is, I think, 3rd or 4th, and their skin tone and appearance. Are they whiter complected, darker complected? Their dress, how they're attired, things. So, and we start to formulate, an opinion, good or bad, perhaps. Doesn't necessarily mean that, prejudice means judging a group, by the way, not a person, but or I should say people within a group. And we do that to some extent as well, in a harmless way. Thinking about people from the South, they like grits typically. That's harmless, okay? Where the problem comes in is if, we get embedded in making prejudgments about someone that are problematic. I'm running out of battery here, so sorry. And that kind of thing, and we won't change. We judge individuals within a group, and then we don't change it. That's the problem, okay? And that's what prejudice is. Bigotry is acting on that prejudice. So I'm going to